It's been an interesting time for Jujutsu Kaisen. Now that we're finally approaching the end of Shinjuku Showdown and Gojo has emerged as the winner, we've definitely seen a lot of feedback from the community, ranging from "this was absolutely awesome" to "I think Sukuna's got one more left in him." But a large portion of this response happens to come from the fact around our knowledge or lack thereof of Sukuna's actual technique. So I thought today was a good day to go over what we do know and my personal theory as to what it actually is. But before we begin, please be sure to like and subscribe so I can keep delivering anime content to you. What is Sukuna's technique has honestly been a question that has dominated the series almost since the beginning. I mean, we know the fundamental idea behind his technique. At least we think we do. But the actual name of it and its limitations and such weren't really outlined at any point. We've gotten tidbits here or there, so we're going to kind of compile those in the what we know column, and then I'm going to go over what I think we know so we can determine what he actually has. So the first thing that we actually know is that his power predominantly uses cutting and slicing. Now, this is kind of funny because both of his names translate to, like cleave and cut or cleave and slice. And they're used differently. One is used basically for like auto-targeting on people, and then the other is just like a rampant, throws a whole flurry of cuts at things and hopes to tear it to pieces. This makes sense. We've seen him do it a couple different times. We've seen him do it to Yuji in the personal world. We've seen him use it, even without using his domain expansion. So that makes sense. We've seen it used enough. And then the other factor is that, at no point has anybody ever stated that seemed weird. I mean, Sukuna is one of the most famous sorcerers, and so if he'd had anything different, it would have made sense that people would have commented on it. So, and this power seems to fit him perfectly. I mean, it's a brute force attack, and Sukuna is not a complicated character. So it fits his personality perfectly. But there is a hang-up with it, and for that we're going to have to turn to his domain expansion. I would honestly think it's fair to say that we probably know more about Sukuna's domain expansion than we do about his base technique. And there's actually a couple of characters like that in Jujutsu Kaisen, but it's most interesting with Sukuna because we've known him the longest. I mean, yes, we do technically see, like cleaving and cutting and slicing from the beginning, like him destroying the cursed spirit that was going to eat Yuji at the school, but it wasn't named. When we find out about Malevolent Shrine, it is loud, it's out there. Sukuna bothers to explain it, at least partially, and then it gets a further explanation in the Shibuya incident. So, with this in mind, I think that when you look at what it is, it's very simple. Basically, Sukuna rather does something impossible in the form that he creates a domain expansion without the barrier. This is stated to be possible, but to most people would be impossible because they make it the equivalent of painting on air. It's supposed to be such a skilled technique that most people don't think they could do it even if they had like 1,000 years of practice. So he creates Malevolent Shrine, and then he can unleash a flurry of cutting attacks that can decimate buildings and blocks of a city. That will be more relevant later, but we do know that it has certain conditions attached to it. We know that it basically is automatic. He doesn't really determine what it attacks. We also know that it has, at most, a radius of about 200 meters. That's pretty large. I mean, we don't have fixed sizes for domain expansions anyway because they're like recreations of the mind, but still, that seems large. Like, I don't think there's any other domain expansions that would come close to that size. So whether that's due to his facet of his cursed energy or due to the fact that it doesn't have a barrier at all, so it's larger than normal. The other nature of it comes from the fact of how this particular domain expansion was named. Now, the translations for Jujutsu Kaisen are always something that has been up to debate in the community. A lot of people think that fan translators get it better, and sadly, in some instances, they do, because sometimes the official, Viz translation is just way off. But sometimes it isn't. Now, here's one of the interesting things as well. Part of why these translations are so hard is that kanji can have different meaning depending on how it's arranged in the individual characters used. One of the important aspects of Malevolent Shrine is it's called the eating place of the Emperor. Now, that partially makes sense. There is kind of a, kitchen theme going on with Sukuna. There's the fact that his two base techniques outside of the domain expansion are represented by knives. Actually, in his explanation of his own ability, they're represented as cutting knives like for a kitchen. And then naming basically his shrine and eating place like a kitchen makes a lot of sense. But there is another facet to this as well, and it has to do with Sukuna's dietary habits. So let's get into that. So, one of the facts we later learn about Sukuna, though, to be fair, I don't think it was ever hidden, because you can kind of look it up if you look at like the wiki and some of the data books, but Sukuna kind of has a nasty habit of eating people. If you've noticed that there's a character hanging around in the background of Jujutsu Kaisen's anime, if you're an anime only, you will undoubtedly have noticed that there is a white-haired monk-looking character that's addressed a couple times. This character actually has a connection to Sukuna in interesting facets, but essentially he comes from a servant class, basically, belonging to Sukuna. I mean, there were people that worshipped him. And in this particular variety, he represents being a cook of humans. Yeah, Sukuna eats people. And that's not even like a hidden fact. It's openly addressed a couple times in the series. Makes an interesting translation then of what he meant when he first woke up and he was talking about all the people that he wanted to see, talking about all the civilians and stuff. We can kind of assume then maybe he was hungry, which is just gross. But there's kind of another aspect of this as well, and it's that he has another ability that, again, if you're anime only, we're getting a little bit into spoilers, but I'm going to keep out of it as much as possible. But if you've seen the trailer, you already know what it is. Sukuna has a weird-ass extra ability. It is the ability to draw a fire arrow back from his hand. Now, I'm not going to say anything of the context of when he does this, but it is interesting that when he does it by saying open, and then we're not exactly sure. See, the word bubble in the manga is represented by a black square. So some people say it's open box, some people say it's open inventory, but he seems to say this and then can use this ability. Now, that sounds kind of interesting when you pair it with another character that we know is very powerful. And he's one of the special grade sorcerers for Jujutsu High. And that character is Yuta Okotsu. Now, I'm not suggesting that Yuta eats people, he obviously doesn't. What I am suggesting, though, is that there is an interesting connection between what appears to be Sukuna's ability and Yuta's. See, if you're anime only, this is a little bit spoilery, but again, I'm keeping the details as bare minimum as possible, but Yuta's ability is confirmed in the comic, especially if you've seen Jujutsu Kaisen 0 already, you know this, that his ability is copy. Now, the nature of how he copied things has changed. His ability in 0 is different than his ability in the main series. This is because when Rika left, it essentially removed his unlimited battery of cursed energy. But he still has a Rika. It's not the same Rika. It's like a manifestation of his powers and his connection to his friend. But essentially, he can, while fighting sorcerers, have Rika consume a part of them. It doesn't have to be the whole person. And he will gain that person's abilities. Now, this isn't like stealing. It is stated specifically to be a copy, and this is one of the prerequisites of it. Rika has to actually consume a part of another sorcerer to gain access to their ability. But it's also been stated at other points in the series by sorcerers that normally a sorcerer could only hold a certain number of techniques, because if you had too many, your brain would essentially explode from overload. Yuta doesn't have this issue, and he's actually brought up as the example of not having this issue because Rika, as part of his curse technique, acts as like a vault, and she acts as a system to keep him from being overloaded. That's really interesting because it's basically what Sukuna has. Let me explain. We know that Ryomen Sukuna was the strongest sorcerer in the Heian era. We also know that he has a habit of eating people. We finally got confirmed to be fair, relatively recently in the manga, that he fought and defeated several stronger sorcerers, including the Sun and Moon Squad and I think they were called the Four Emperors or the Four Pillars. The translation might have also been a little weird. But essentially, he defeated the top brass of sorcerers in his era and kind of ended up getting worshipped because of it. Now, my theory is that Sukuna has consumption. Sukuna's primary ability is to defeat somebody, and then he will consume them, and he gains their full abilities. I think he can also supercharge it because of his extreme amount of cursed energy, although, to be fair, his extreme amount of cursed energy might very well come from consumption itself. By continually defeating sorcerers and consuming them, he gains more power. Now, there are many hints to this. The fact that his Malevolent Shrine's alternative name is the eating place of the Emperor. The fact he can externalize it, even though it's said not to be a physical object, would seem to act very much similar to how Rika does for Yuta. And the whole aspect of him having two faces and two arms makes some sense. See, in the original folk history that Jujutsu Kaisen borrows from, it's kind of said that Ryomen Sukuna was a real person, and depending on which side you were reading, he was either a tyrant monster that had to be defeated by the Japanese army and emperor, or he was a freedom fighter that the people that lived in the area he was born in loved. It kind of swings back and forth. What is important is that sometimes he's described as one person with two faces and two arms, or he's described as twins, two people born. So it's entirely possible that he got his second head and arms from his brother, which might make sense. It's entirely possible the cutting ability isn't his. He could have only had consumption originally, and then after either defeating his brother or his brother was defeated and he consumed him, gained the extra abilities, and then went on to be the strongest sorcerer that we know. There's also another reason to believe this might be the case with him, and it's a little meta, but follow me with this. See, we know that Gege was heavily inspired by Hunter x Hunter. And in Hunter x Hunter, one of the strongest characters, if not the strongest character, is Meruem. Meruem's whole ability is consumption. As a Chimera Ant and as a Nen user, he just has to eat somebody, not even all of them, but just part of them, to gain their Nen abilities, and he gets a big boost to his own Nen supply. That pretty much describes Sukuna to a T. And so I think Sukuna's ability is consumption. Essentially, he just went through life and then eventually his afterlife consuming various things. It's not even stated that he could not apply this to cursed spirits. I mean, hypothetically, if he ate one, I don't know what it would do, but it's possible he would also gain that ability. So, do I think he has a number one left in him? Maybe, but I doubt it. Because he's in his weakest state right now, and I think we're going to get an interruption. But do I think this is his ability? Absolutely. Whether we'll get a full explanation of it in the comic or not remains to be seen. But we can always hope, and we'll finally get a confirmation here pretty soon. Why don't you tell me what you think his powers have been this whole time in the comments below. Bye.